The Belgian Prime Minister has promised changes in his country's constitution after 250,000 people marched in protest at the handling of the child sex scandal there. Lawyers have criticised a Sunday paper for publishing evidence in the Rachel Nickel case that wasn't given to the jury. And Newcastle put 5 goals past Manchester United, pushing them to their worst defeat for 12 years. Good evening. More than 250,000 Belgians have marched through Brussels in protest at the authorities' handling of the country's child sex and murder scandal. Special trains and buses ferried protesters from all over the country to the city. Tonight, Belgium's Prime Minister Jean-Luc Dehaene has promised changes to the constitution to end political promotions in the justice system.
Even the widest boulevards of central Brussels were overwhelmed. Hundreds of thousands of ordinary families, a sea of white balloons, white flowers. It was the White March which families of the murdered and missing girls had asked for. They are convinced a cover-up is protecting police and politicians who had links with the paedophiles and could have stopped the killings.
Pour Julie, pour Anne, pour Eefje, il était trop tard.
For the 4 girls whose bodies have been found, said one mother, it's too late. But there must be change, she said. And it's the campaigning determination of the families which produced today's response, from ordinary people, most of whom have never marched or protested in their lives.
Justice. Justice, that's all.
It's in the government, it's the police, everybody is involved in this problem, so they want to see real changes.
With this huge force of ordinary Belgians on the march, the government is struggling to keep up with the rising tide of public anger. And Belgium's Prime Minister took action even as the march was still going on. Jean-Luc Dehaene told relatives the constitution must be changed, stopping the political appointment of judges, which has meant they owe allegiance to particular parties.
We agree that there are a certain number of reforms necessary in our justice system, and where the parents place the accent most is that the rights of the victims must be much more elaborated in our system of justice.
The march ended peacefully despite its immense scale. A few people did break away, pelting police with eggs, but it was the dignified power of the majority which apparently forced the government to consider starting a fundamental clean-up of Belgian public life. James Robbins, BBC News, Brussels.
Here, lawyers have strongly attacked the decision of a Sunday newspaper to publish evidence not put before the jury in the Rachel Nickel case. The Mail on Sunday said the public had a right to know and has invited Colin Stagg, the man acquitted of her murder, to respond to the allegations that they've printed.
This was Colin Stagg's response to today's newspaper article. He set it alight and tossed it onto the grass in front of his South London home. He left it to a friend to denounce the newspaper's decision to publish details of police evidence that was never put to a jury.
You can't accuse somebody with no evidence whatsoever. There's no evidence against Colin.
Rachel Nickel was stabbed in July 1992 whilst walking on Wimbledon Common with her 2-year-old son. In 1994, Colin Stagg was acquitted of the murder after the judge ruled that information gathered by a female police undercover officer was inadmissible. The prosecution case collapsed before a jury could hear the evidence. Speaking afterwards, Colin Stagg insisted he was innocent.
Don't be angry with me because I didn't do it. If you want to be angry with someone, be angry with the real murderer.
But today, the Mail on Sunday published what it says are the pieces of evidence which were never put to a jury. They include several statements from witnesses in which Colin Stagg's name appears. One of Mr. Stagg's barristers described the newspaper's actions as sleazy and said his client was never given the chance to prove his innocence.
It wasn't his fault that the Crown Prosecution Service, armed with all this information, none of this is new, came to the decision to offer no evidence against him. If the trial had continued, he would have continued to protest his innocence, as he always has, and would have called in excess of 55 witnesses of fact to demonstrate his innocence.
But this afternoon, the newspaper was unmoved.
And I would strongly defend, and I'm sure the Mail on Sunday will strongly defend, any allegation of defamation. Colin Stagg, no doubt, will wish to answer in the Mail on Sunday the points that have been raised by the depositions that we've published today.
Rachel Nickel's parents decided not to comment on today's article. In a separate statement, the Crown Prosecution Service said that Colin Stagg cannot be tried again for the same charge of murder. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News in Roehampton, southwest London.
The widow who lost her High Court battle to have a baby using her dead husband's sperm has welcomed parliamentary moves to change the law. Diane Blood says the action may help other people in future, but she intends to continue her fight against the existing law through the courts.
Diane Blood's raising funds for a legal challenge to allow her to be artificially inseminated with her late husband's sperm. She welcomes calls for new laws, but hopes the appeal court will show the Fertilisation Authority, the HFEA, already has powers to help her.
Public opinion with regard to my case has brought about a discussion of a private member's bill to amend the law. Whilst this is fantastic news and may help others in the future, one of the points my case seeks to argue is that the HFEA already has the necessary implement to allow me to proceed by way of their discretionary powers, but my particular case is still far from one.
The High Court case was lost because Mrs. Blood hadn't obtained her husband Stephen's written permission before his death from meningitis in March last year. An MP and peers are willing to introduce a private member's bill to assist her in the new session of Parliament opening this week. Ministers won't stand in their way, but Mrs. Blood fears that with an election due, she can't rely on new legislation. She hopes to fight on through the courts and in the meantime perhaps get permission to take the sperm abroad. Wesley Kerr, BBC News.
Demonstrators invaded the grounds of the home of the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael Heseltine, today. No one was arrested, but the protesters dug a hole before leaving. The group of environmentalists and ex-miners said they were protesting about the increase of open cast mining and the damage it causes. They said Mr. Heseltine was to blame because of his policy of closing deep pit coal mines. The Governor of the Bank of England, Eddie George, has warned of more difficulties for the European single currency if economic growth in Europe doesn't pick up. The countries participating in currency union will be chosen in just over a year's time, but many are struggling to meet the conditions for entry.
Welcome. Eddie George is still not saying whether he thinks we should join a single currency. That, he maintains, is a matter for the politicians. But speaking on the BBC's Money programme, he warned that slow economic growth in Europe would make it more difficult to go ahead.
Well, I think it'll make a very big difference whether the European economy as a whole, which has been going through a very sluggish period, actually picks up pace between now and the end of 97, early 1998, when the decision has to be taken. Without that, then I think it would be much more difficult for the preconditions to be met.
In Britain, the economy is not so sluggish. Companies exporting to the rest of Europe, like Philips here in Hastings, have benefited from the devaluation of the pound. But some companies fear they may face discrimination in trade with the rest of Europe if Britain stays out of the single currency.
If that trading situation became so unbalanced in the future, then any company would have to look at its opportunities elsewhere to be able to compete on a world market.
In countries like France, where preparations for the single currency have provoked strike action, creative accounting by the government is being used to meet the conditions for entry. Governor of the Bank of England warned that if currency union became a cosmetic exercise, the risks would be very much greater. Despite his awareness of the risks, Eddie George rejects the Eurosceptic argument that membership of the single European currency should be ruled out now. He said it would be unwise to prejudge whether Britain should go in or stay out. Greg Wood, BBC News at the Bank of England.
Forces of the former Afghan government have attacked the capital Kabul for the first time since they lost control of the city to the Taliban militia. Rockets hit Kabul airport as hundreds of Taliban fighters moved north to protect the city. Tonight, the northern Afghan leader, General Dostum, is reported to have sent a ceasefire proposal to the Taliban leaders. Final results from Japan's general election show the country is heading for another period of coalition government. The dominant Liberal Democratic Party, led by Prime Minister Ryotaro Hashimoto, increased their number of seats but failed to win an overall majority. They're now looking for coalition partners. Voter turnout was at a record low of about 58% because of disillusionment over corruption scandals. Newcastle have returned to the top of the Premiership after winning 5-0 against last season's champions Manchester United at St James Park. It was United's heaviest defeat in 12 years. In Scotland, Celtic missed out on their opportunity to overtake Rangers at the top of the Premier Division after drawing 2-2 with Hearts at Tynecastle. Ernie Els won his third successive Toyota World Match Play Championship at Wentworth this afternoon, beating Vijay Singh of Fiji in the final by 3 holes. His 3-year total prize money in this event alone now totals £500,000.
Steady drizzle had descended on Wentworth when Vijay Singh's challenge began to fizzle out. He got back to all square in the afternoon round when a visit to the trees on the 4th handed the advantage back to Els.
Hole conceded. Els wins the hole. Els 1 up.
They halved the next, but from then on the South African established a grip on the match which he never let go. This pitch to the 6th set up another win. Singh missing his birdie putt, but then Els holing his to go 2 ahead. Singh's misfortunes on the green continued. He missed putts on the next 2 holes, and by then the reigning champion was 4 up. Although he'd been 6 holes adrift and in danger of going down in the first round, Els' form since had been relentless. The World Match Play Championship has seen many miraculous recoveries, and Singh's hopes flickered briefly at the 11th, where this brilliant chip got 1 hole back. But that was as close as he got. A short putt from Els ensured the match got no further than the 16th hole. An emphatic 3-2 victory for Els over one of the stronger fields in the history of the event. His 3rd successive title gives the 27-year-old South African another place in golf's record books. Neil Bennett, BBC News.
That's it. That's all from the BBC Newsroom this weekend. Good night.